Hi, it's Carrie. Welcome to Sundra Sisterhood. This is a YouTube channel for the single and childless, not by choice person. Oop, looks like Gav wants to say hi too. He's usually not far. I don't know if he's the one with the separation anxiety or it's me. Sometimes I think it's me. Our video today is beware of these 4 things related to grief. Grief sucks, but it's super healthy. It actually really helps us work through things, process through things, and get to the other side. It's like eating your vegetables though. All right, the first thing that I want you to be aware of when managing grief is getting stuck in your head about the what ifs. I don't know about you, but I lived here for like multiple years. What if I had this? What if I had this? What if I did this differently? What if this person did this differently? A lot of whys. Why did this happen? Why me? I mean, on and on and on. And I mean, that was my brain working through this. But the key was that I never actually answered those questions. I just bombarded myself with a ton of questions. And sometimes a healthy exercise can be, well, answer the question, because oftentimes you'll come up with a fairly reasonable answer. Well, because I was doing the best thing I knew how to do at the time. Because that relationship wasn't working for me. Because I didn't realize that I was going to end up needing to have a hysterectomy, or, you know, that's for me. But we use hindsight to really get stuck in our head. If you struggle with this and you find that you're really not able to unstick yourself on your own and you don't feel like you have the supports in place around that, this is where a therapist can be really helpful. Sometimes we don't even notice that we're doing it because it just becomes so habitual. We have this like tape in our head. One of the things that I talk with clients as a therapist is, and this analogy dates me a little bit, but I don't know if any of you grew up in the 80s and 90s, but probably actually a lot of you did. But grandfather clocks were a thing. And I can remember when we first got this grandfather clock, I used to hear it chime all the time. It would go every 15 minutes and then it would like do a dong on the hour for the number of hours of what time it was. Eventually you start to not hear it because it happens so consistently. It just becomes a part of your routine. And I would get to times where I'm not hearing the grandfather clock. I might hear it when it like gongs midnight or noon because it is so intense and so many, and it's so repetitious that it kind of breaks through that barrier. But I just stopped listening to it. And our thoughts can do the same thing. When we're really telling ourselves anything, we can sometimes stop hearing it. And so we don't even notice that we are bombarding ourselves with unhelpful thoughts in our head. So have an awareness around not getting stuck in your head. The other thing I want you to be aware of is blaming yourself. There's no use. Maybe you made decisions that contributed to the outcome. Maybe you didn't. It's actually irrelevant. Those are all things that happened in the past that you cannot change. It's done. It's over. You cannot go in a time machine and change those decisions. And your life may end up turning out in a way where you wouldn't even if you could. And it's not helpful to blame yourself. When you start to blame yourself, sometimes even just telling yourself that is not helpful. I'm going to tell you another analogy that I use as a therapist that you're going to think, wow, this lady's nuts. And it's another 90s reference, PS. So there's this movie called Big Daddy. And if I were a better YouTuber, I would insert this clip here, but I'm not. So you're going to have to look it up on your own. But there's a movie called Big Daddy, has Adam Sandler in it. And they are in Central Park. I think it's Central Park. And they are watching the rollerbladers. Yes, rollerbladers. I told you it was the 90s. Coming down the hill. And for their own like shits and giggles, just to like be immature, they throw a stick in the middle of the road and the rollerbladers, you know, fall and they laugh. And then, you know, as the movie goes on, he recognizes he needs to be a better example. And so instead of throwing the stick, they end up holding a sign saying, be careful. I want you to be holding up a sign saying, be careful. And I also want you to be throwing a stick in front of your own thoughts. And the metaphor around it is all of these negative thoughts about how it's your fault if you just would have done differently. I want you to just throw a stick in that and disrupt those thoughts and tell yourself that's not helpful. This takes practice, this takes repetition, this takes consistency. You may always have to do this, but the idea being is interrupt those thoughts. Once those thoughts gain momentum going down that hill, they can go on for a really long time. So interrupt the thoughts when you start blaming yourself. It's not helpful. It's irrelevant. All right, the third thing I want you to really remind yourself as you're working through grief is be careful about isolating. This is very easy to do, particularly when you're grieving disenfranchised grief, grief related to childlessness, because it can feel very isolating. It can feel like nobody understands you, and oftentimes they don't. So even if you're around people, it can feel isolating because you feel alone in your thoughts. However, I want you to do your best to not isolate. Even if it's getting on YouTube and watching channels of people like me who are also have or are going through this. Go to a movie theater. Even if you don't feel like interacting with other people, you're at least around an environment where you're around others. A coffee shop. Really resist going multiple days without interacting with others and isolating yourself. I'm not saying you've got to be a party animal. I'll get to that beware in a minute. But don't isolate. This is also where a therapist can be helpful because you'll have a place where you can really express yourself, and it may make it a little bit easier to go hang out with other people because you have this other place where you can talk about this really difficult thing. Start small if you need to. The caveat around this one is just because I'm saying don't isolate, it doesn't mean I'm saying hang out with anybody, everybody, no matter what. It's okay to be discerning about who you're hanging out with and who is maybe inadvertently or maybe willingly being insensitive or not thinking about what you're going through at the time, and maybe you feel worse in that situation. I'm not telling you to hang out with people who aren't at least neutral, if not supportive. So it's okay to still be discerning around who you're hanging out with as you're trying not to isolate. There may be people in your life that don't make the cut. Okay, I just realized I have 5 things. Okay, so the fourth thing is beware of coping skills that have negative impacts on your well-being. So here I'm talking about overeating. Say hi to me for this one. I will eat for comfort. So this is one that I have to really pay attention to. Drinking, other substances. These things, while they may numb you out in the moment, they may help you not think about something in the moment, particularly the alcohol. That's a depressant, and it is not going to be helpful in the long run. And trauma is really where these types of addictions grow and breed. So please be careful about how you're coping and seek out healthy coping skills. And again, I know I've said this a couple of times, but I say this because the grief around this is so very real. Consider a therapist. If you find yourself starting to dabble in some of these things, pay attention to it, be aware around it, and seek out help. The final thing is the hardest thing, for me at least, I will say. This is because our brain does this as a way to kind of help take the edge off and help cope, but it's not healthy long-term and ongoing. And that is, be careful about fantasizing about a life that isn't happening. Don't do it. You know, I can understand why the brain does it. It's actually pretty ingenious how the brain does it. It just gives us a little bit of hope. And so it's okay to do that in certain increments and in a shorter term way. But if you find yourself living in this world that doesn't exist in your head, you will miss out, and it delays being able to start living the life that you can live. I'm not talking about bypassing grief. I'm not talking about allowing yourself to have some really tough times. What I am saying though is make sure you're not getting stuck and staying in the fantasy. because there is a life that's meaningful, fulfilling, and fun. Even if you're single, even if you're childless, not by choice. It's out there. Hopefully this channel can help you see a little bit of that. My life is not perfect. I go through some downs. I have little grief moments all the time. I know that what is the most helpful for me is not getting stuck and not fantasizing about what can't be, but really reimagining what that future can be. Beware of these things as you are grieving. Getting stuck in your head, blaming yourself, isolating, getting deep into unhealthy habits like overeating or addiction, drinking. Really be intentional and try not to stay in a fantasy around a life that isn't going to happen. Thanks for watching, and subscribe to Sonder Sisterhood for more videos for the single and childless, not by choice person.